Hi everybody, welcome to the What Motivates Supporters to Take Part in Fundraising Events, presented by Wood for Trees. We are going to wait a couple of minutes just to make sure any sort of stragglers get in on time, but a little bit of housekeeping. If you have anything to say in the chat, there's a chat function that would be great to sort of hear from you guys, get you guys to introduce yourself. We are going to introduce ourselves when the presentation begins. If you haven't already got a copy of the handout, it's in the handout section, so you can download the white paper that we wrote on this topic as well. And as we go through, if there's any questions, please feel free to stick them in the question section, and we will try and get to as many as we can at the end. My name's Stephen. This is Kaylee. We're going to be taking you through this presentation. So yeah, I think we'll just give it maybe 2-3 more minutes, and then we will get started. So welcome everybody. Oh, and there'll even be a poll at one point, so you will even get to contribute as well. And that's all the functionality that there is in GoWebinar. It's a very strange feeling watching the attendee number just go up and up and up. It's quite odd.
Yeah, I have heard don't penalise the people who come in on time, but I think we'll allow a few minutes of leeway.
Absolutely.
Just in case, just while everyone's getting in, getting settled and comfortable.
Absolutely.
But for those who are here on time, thank you very much for joining us on time. You're either on time or you're late, so they say, but.
We should have put that in the things we agree on, Kaylee.
Well, yeah. No, I think it's very easy with all this working from home. Steve and I are both at home at the moment. And it's very easy to feel like you have to jump from one meeting to the next. So sometimes I find it can be nice to join the meeting, sort of have a breather, if you like, get settled before we jump right in.
Absolutely. I think sometimes new systems as well take time to load up, don't they, and download to your computer, and sometimes going between Zoom and Teams is not the smooth process that it could be or should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember the time when we didn't know what Zoom was?
Yeah.
Lifetime ago. Okay, well, we've given it a few extra minutes. How about we make a start then?
I think that's a good idea.
Cool. Okay, great. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Those who are here already, joining us live, big welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us. And everyone watching it on the recording, special welcome to you as well. So however method you're joining us, thank you very much. In case you missed Stephen's brief introduction about housekeeping, just to recap on that, fire exits are wherever they may be in your location. I'm not going to mention anything about that. But we do have both a question and a chat feature on the GoToWebinar pane. So feel free to use that as you like. Whoever's not talking, so Stephen and I are going to be presenting pretty much jointly. Whoever's not talking can try and answer any questions as we're going along. However, if there are quite a few questions, what we'll do is come back to them at the end. Equally, feel free to use the chat function if you want to introduce yourselves to everyone else on the call. We do have quite a few people on the call, so it might get a little bit lively. You might be able to see in there as well a handout section. There's a beautiful white paper in there, ready for you to read at your leisure and pleasure. It essentially encapsulates everything that we're going to go through today and then runs through it in a bit more detail as well. But on with our slides to kick us off. Hopefully everyone's in the right place. Hopefully that title looks a bit familiar to you all. What motivates supporters to take part in fundraising events? There we go. Next slide, please. So just before we start and get into the detail then, a little bit of background about us. So in case you haven't heard of Wood for Trees, that's where Stephen and I work. Wood for Trees is an expert in data analytics, insight, and systems work for primarily charities and non-profits. Stephen and I are both part of the analyst tribe at Wood for Trees and have been for a little while now. Our backgrounds are in physics and psychology. Stephen is a physics guru, a bit of the harder science, and I'm a fan of the softer science of psychology. And hence why I'm really, really interested in why people give to charity, what their motivators are. I really like working with Stephen because we both share a similar ethos into the way that we work. So we both really, really love the detail of the data. We're quite geeky like that, really. But primarily, we believe the magic really happens when we can apply that data into real world stuff and actually make sure charities get some value from it. We agree on quite a few things, so kettlebells over couches. We are both quite fitness fanatics. I'm sure everyone can relate to being sat at your desk all day. We like to get up regularly, sort of standard intervals, pick up some kettlebells or other heavy things at the gym. We prefer soppy over scary movies. We can't understand why people like scary movies. It's so baffling. Why would you want to be sit and scared? But then we do disagree on a few things as well. So Stephen prefers his children of a human nature. I much prefer cats and dogs when it comes to my young. Getting a little bit more serious, things we disagree on. When it comes to statistical programming languages, I much prefer the stats method of R. Stephen, however, he's a bit snaky. He much prefers programming in Python. So that's a bit about us. Next slide. So in terms of things that we'll cover today, I will kick us off with having a look at fundraising through the eyes of philanthropic psychology. If you haven't heard of that relatively new branch of psychology, not to worry. We'll go through the main key points and things that you need to know which are relevant here. I will introduce the topic of our feasibility study, and that's the main crux really of what this presentation is about. At that point, I will then hand over to Stephen, who will talk you through the method and the results of that study, everything in a bit more detail, essentially. And then Stephen will wrap us off with how we can best make use of fundraiser motivations. And that's really the magic, if you like. That's what we're most excited about, is really how we take the information and apply that into your charity and your everyday fundamentals and your strategy and your tactics going forwards. So we'll start then. What is philanthropic psychology? And I think some people on the call may have heard of this. Some people maybe not. It might be sort of brand new, and that's fine. So in a nutshell, philanthropic psychology is a relatively new branch of psychology. It's a term that's been coined in the last 20 or so years by the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. It's a relatively smallish team, I'd say, based in south of England, and they do a lot of research both in the UK and in the States around understanding the science behind giving. So in the time before philanthropic psychology, a lot of charitable giving, or they call it pro-social behaviour, was sort of lumped in with social psychology. But what the folks at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy have done is really carve out a special little niche group for philanthropic psychology. And so they seek to understand why we give to charity in the way that we do and in the methods that we do. And most importantly, I think for us, is why they give to charity. And taking a bit of a step back almost, their whole ethos is really seeing supporters, so people who give to charity, be that give financially through donations, be that they give their time or they give their voice to a campaign, any way that you give to a charity, they see those supporters as fully fledged people, okay, not just as donors who only exist when they give to a charity in some way and kind of cease to exist afterwards. They really recognise that people have lives outside of a charity. And so even if we think of the most absolutely dedicated charity supporter, we think perhaps, let's say roughly 20% of the things that they think about are related to you and your charity. Perhaps your charity goals, your mission, your ethos, your way of working. But that still leaves 80% of everything else. Perhaps they're thinking, gosh, I don't know, what am I going to have for lunch? What time is it? How many things do I need to do today? You know, all these other things that we think about. And philanthropic psychology really seeks to understand the people instead of just people as donors. And that then leads us on to the idea that as people, we have three basic fundamental human needs. And these basic human needs were sort of coined around 1985, and in the world of psychology, they're generally undisputed. And they state that in order to be successful, happy, healthy people, we need to have, number one, a good sense of autonomy. So we need to feel that we have the freedom to choose our own decisions. We need to feel like we can make our own choices. Second, we need to feel competent in that the choices we make are good choices. No one really likes being undermined in the choices they make, of course. It makes you feel bad. So we need to feel that we have autonomy to do what we want and competency to know that the choices we make are good and they are robust choices and they make sense. And then lastly, we need to feel like we have a sense of connectedness, or if you like, in other words, relationships with others. People are primarily social beings, right? Everyone exists in a social network. We're connected with other people. And this theory states that if we have these three basic human needs, they'll get us pretty much a long way in order to be a pretty happy, healthy, functioning person. And so based on that solid foundation, philanthropic psychology states that if we take these three basic human needs and we increase them in some way, we can boost our well-being. Well, that's great. But we can importantly boost our well-being, increase our well-being through fundraising. And that's where it gets really, really exciting for charities. And if we think about it as being a donor, it sort of makes sense in that when we, just as regular people, give to charity in some way, you know, be that financially or our voice, or give our time to volunteering perhaps, we feel autonomous in that we can choose what type of volunteering or what type of donation we can give. We feel competent in knowing that we're giving our time or money, etc., to a worthwhile cause. And that almost leads us to feel more connected with other people. We feel perhaps more connected with other volunteers or more connected directly with beneficiaries. And that's really, really exciting because we know that from all the research that they do at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, happy people give more. And so what's really exciting for us as fundraisers is that if we can boost these three basic human needs, if we can effectively love our supporters, they will show us love back in the form of donations, volunteering, campaigning, etc. So that's really broad brush, a bit of an introduction to philanthropic psychology. If you haven't heard of the Institute, I do recommend checking them out. They've got a really nice website and they really do practice what they preach in terms of applying their research. So that's a background, but what about, okay, well, how do these things specifically translate into that question of why? Why do people give? That brings us on then to this next slide, the motivations behind giving and doing. And for me, this is, I think, probably my second favorite slide of the presentation. So broadly, philanthropic psychology states we have 3 primary motivations behind giving or doing something for a charity. So we'll start on the left-hand side and work our way over to the right. And on the left, we have these, what I like to call superstar givers. This group of people are motivated to give to our charity or do something for our charity based on their personal identity. So they want to show behaviour which reflects who they are as a person. So things which directly speak to our personal identity. Because of this, because they've got a really sort of ingrained sense of behaving or acting out or showing to the world who they are as an individual, we think that this group are likely to show the highest form of engagement with our charity and our cause and our mission. If we were to speak with this group of people, they might say things like, I give my support because I am a cat person, for example. Being a cat person is part of who I am as an individual, and I want the world to know it. Alternatively, they might say things like, I'm running in this event because I am a cancer survivor. Being a survivor is part of me and who I am and my identity. And so we can almost start to think about how some charities in particular, and especially with the events sphere, really appeal to these different personas and these different identities when they're designing these events. I think it's equally true in terms of campaigns as well, appealing to different personas in order to attract attention, attract donations and participation. So that's our first motivation. In the middle of the screen, we've got quite a few participants in here. I use the term participants, donors, supporters interchangeably throughout this. And I think this middle group might resonate quite a lot with a lot of people in events teams that we've got on the call now. So this group are motivated to donate or take part in our events based on relationships they have with others. So we call this group those motivated based on their relationships. And here the emphasis isn't so much now on us as individuals, but it's on our connecting strings, connecting us to someone else. And therefore, because that shift in emphasis has occurred, we feel like these are likely to be the middle of the road in terms of their engagement with the charity. If we were to speak with this group, they might say things like, I'm giving a donation in memory of my friend. And that's really important because they are maintaining that relationship or that really meaningful relationship with someone else, even if they've passed away. So it's not as if someone has to be sort of living and you're continuing to nurture a live relationship. Alternatively, they might say things like, I'm signing up to do this event because my dog has used the service. It doesn't necessarily have to be a people relationship. And I think lots of us with pets, myself included, or those who work with animal charities, know that giving or doing because of that relationship with your pets is really, really meaningful and really deep and really personal for a lot of us. It doesn't have to necessarily even be deep personal relationships we have with others. For those of us on the call who work with religious charities, we might have that more sort of perhaps distant, perhaps close, however you want to define it, relationship with a religious figure like God, for example. Or it could even be that relationship we have with perhaps beneficiaries. So although we don't know them personally, we're giving or we're giving our time or doing something in some way because of that relationship we have for our neighbours. And then lastly, right on the right-hand side, we've got those who are motivated based on the situation. We call these the situationals. So this group are motivated to do something based on their behaviour based on something in their environment or something sort of externally to themselves. And because the emphasis really isn't on us as individuals, it's not on our relationship with others, it's something in our environment, something external to us, we feel like this group are likely to have the lowest engagement with the charity, with the cause. If we speak with this group, they might say things like, I'm giving up my time to do some volunteering because my work are doing some volunteering days and your charity was a convenient way to do that. Great, okay, that might resonate with some of us here. Alternatively, they might say things like, I'm donating to this campaign because I saw an advert on the TV. Okay, great. That speaks a lot, I suppose, for people designing that advert. In terms of that supporter giving that donation, though, they're seeing our advert. They recognise the need, whatever that might be. They perhaps physically can make a donation. They have the funds to do that. And so they give. In terms of looking at the situational motivated people through our event lens, we might think of this group as perhaps our bucket list supporters. You know, these are the people who want to do our event, not necessarily because they've got any relationship with the cause, not perhaps any personal identifying factors about the mission, but just because they want to do the event. And that might resonate a lot with some of us here. And it might be that, well, is that a little bit negative, actually? You know, surely if anything, we want to have those motivated based on their personal identity and their relationships with others. Those, after all, have the highest engagement. So perhaps we want to stay away from these situational motivated people. And I want to almost squash that myth right away, because actually, I think what we've seen a lot throughout the last few years especially is that those charities who are succeeding and still doing really well are those who have that diverse portfolio in terms of diverse range of income, diverse supporter base. And I personally really resonate with those motivated based on their situation. Why do I say that? Well, because I have been one of them. It's a bit of a running joke here at Wood for Trees that everyone who I've ever met, I mention that I've done the Bournemouth Half Marathon. That was a really big achievement for me. And there I am. There's me running along at probably mile 10 or 11. That's down in Bournemouth, of course, and there's the beach huts in the background, and the eagle-eyed amongst us will notice that I'm wearing my charity vest. Now, I ran that half marathon for a children's hospice. And just to help illustrate these groups in a bit more detail, and really just to get a picture of me doing the race in there, here's my example of how I fit into that situational category. So I essentially just wanted to run the half marathon. We at Wood for Trees support one charity per year to fundraise for, and Julia's House, the Children's Hospice, was the charity that we chose that year. And because I just wanted to run the half marathon and do a little bit of fundraising on the side, I thought, yes, I'll choose them. I wasn't motivated really based on any relationships with others. I'm not, for example, I'm fortunate enough not to know any children who've used that service before. I don't know anyone personally in my family who's used their service, so I'm not motivated based on any personal relationships. And equally, I wasn't motivated based on my personal identity either. I don't identify as a parent, for example, or perhaps a caregiver to children like that. So I am your classic bucket list situationally motivated person. And now I think at this point we have a poll, which hopefully Naomi is waiting in the wings to bring up. If you could do that, please. So our poll is open, wonderful. So if you were to participate, or if you've previously taken part in an event, what do you think has been your primary motivation? Do we think it's, there's no necessarily right or wrong answer. It's all individual to us and those who've done events before or think they might do an event sometime in the future. Are you motivated based on your personal identity? Are you doing something because that's who you are as a person and how you identify? Are you doing it based on your relationships with others? Or perhaps you're doing it like me, just because you want to do that event. It's just something that you've seen in the external environment that's really motivated you to do that and to fundraise for them.
I'm just looking at the results now, and I think it's very interesting that we, even in this little straw poll, we still see that relationally motivated supporters are the biggest majority. I think that's really interesting.
Absolutely, and that's actually really sort of congruous with what we found when we get really deep and look into the data as well. Absolutely, relationships we know just intuitively are really, really powerful. But a lot of the research that they've done in the philanthropic psychology world sort of really, really emphasizes the importance of those relationships, and especially how charities can use those relationships in things like their fundraising comms, just to really sort of highlight you know, friends like yours or other parents like yours, and really use that to their advantage. Wonderful. Beautiful stuff. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on. So there are broadly our three motivations. One is not necessarily better than the other. They are all different. We might say things like some are more engaged with our charity than others. And it might be that some are able to fundraise higher amounts than others. Absolutely, we know that that's just the case from the analysis that we've been doing. But I think it is important to know that one is not necessarily better. It's not, for example, true that we need to just ignore those situationally motivated people. For me personally, doing that Bournemouth half marathon, am I going to do it again for Julia's house? No, probably not. For me, that was a bit of a, you know, bucket list exercise. But does it mean I deserve any less love from the charity for doing it? Absolutely not. And if anyone from Julia's house is on the call, I was really, really impressed with a lot of the stewardship and cheering on during the day. So no, I'm probably not going to do any fundraising for them again, but would I donate to an appeal? Perhaps, because I've almost made relationships and connections with the events team from being involved with them. So that then brings us on to our feasibility study and the nuts and bolts of exactly what we've been doing. So just to broadly discuss what this is, so we've talked a bit initially about philanthropic psychology and the principles and the idea of looking at people as people, you know, not sort of forgetting that they have lives outside of charity. And the idea that we have three motivations behind giving. We've got either our personal identity, our relationships with others, and the situation or our environment. On the other side, we at Wood for Trees, we know a thing or two about data. We eat, sleep, live and breathe it in the most geeky way possible. And what this whole feasibility study is about, in a nutshell, is trying to find that motivation for giving or for taking part in our events based on some data in the real world that charities often collect. It's really about bridging between what the research says and what actually happens in the real world. is it possible to find these motivations for giving based on information that charities collect? And if it is, absolutely fantastic. How can we then apply those learnings into fundraising strategy, into tactics going forwards? And that's what our feasibility study is about. I'll now hand over control to Stephen, who'll talk you through a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Kaylee. Yeah, so as Kaylee said, we're now in the sort of nitty gritty of linking the data that we can get access to and to the philanthropic psychology principles that Kaylee's mentioned already. And I think that, you know, as you would expect, the best way to understand why a person does what they do is to listen to them, to actually hear what they have to say. So, I'm sure we have all seen or had our own fundraising platform page where we're raising money for specific things and had to sign in and upload our photograph and, talk a little bit about, why we're doing it. And the data there would also include things like all of the people who donated to you, the amount they donated individually, how many of them there were, any comments that they had mentioned about it, what charity you're fundraising for, what the date is of the event that you're doing, or whatever. And we realized quite quickly that if we were able to get access to the story of why the person is doing what they're doing, we would be able to pull out from the text what the actual principle is. So our first task was to try and collate as much information, as many stories as possible together against supporters, so that we were able to see, to sort of begin the feasibility study really and think about, well, if we had these stories, how could we categorize them? What would we be looking for in terms of being able to put them into these three separate pots? So there is a lot of rich information behind in these stories. This is an example of a story that we would have collected, and I guess there are many things in the process that we took. There are things like removing emojis and things like that to try and make the text more readable for the code. The other thing that we kind of quickly hit upon was the idea that in order to help supporters fundraise in these pages, a lot of charities will pre-populate the story with a bit of information about what the event is, what the campaign is. And while those things are very interesting and useful, they don't actually give us any insight or any data on why the individual is doing it. All of that information has been provided by the charity itself. So one of the first major steps that we need to do is we need to find these, we call like stop phrases, and we need to remove them because they are not actually input from the supporter themselves. Once we do that, we then have to think about what kind of phrases make up. We're basically going to be using our text analysis to find phrases and words that we feel are linked to the specific motivations that we're talking about. Now, this process is a bit of an iterative process. We look at some stories individually, we speak to the charity, we come up with a list that we feel aligns with the specific charity that we're working with. In this instance, in this feasibility study, we actually work with quite a few different charities, whether it be like international aid, animal, religious charities. There were lots of different charities, and they all had very specific language that was being used. So it was very important to make word and phrase lists that were bespoke to each charity within the motivational groups. But once we had done that, we were able to compare our motivational word phrase lists against the text that we had seen. And as I'm sure is no surprise to anyone, they were not only one motivation. So nearly everybody had, or a vast majority of everybody, had motivational words and phrases aligning to the multiple different motivations. As we can see in this example, there are quite a few situational phrases that have been matched, but there are also some identity phrases and some relational phrases and words that have been matched up as well. So we quickly realized that there was not going to be a nice simple filter that we'd be able to apply. We had to think a bit more creatively, really, about what we were doing. So what we decided to do was we turned the stories into scores. We basically looked at the proportion of the words that were matching, the proportion of the motivational words per section, and we gave them a percentage. So looking at Mary as an example, 70% of the words that we identified motivationally were identity words, only 10 situational, 10 relational. So her green triangle on our little triad shows a very high, she's pointing quite highly towards identity. So she would be an identity motivated person. And then you can see from John, sometimes it's not quite as clear cut, you know, a 20, 50, 30 split. You know, he's a situational person, but he still has strong feelings towards, strong, you know, motivational phrasing towards identity and relational. And then Sam is more traditionally relational. And it was very interesting because the relational group is very big, the relational matching is very high, and you know we did see quite a lot of people with some relational words, but that was to be expected. And I think it also goes a little bit to what Kaylee was saying before about these people are not better or worse. You know, I often think about the relational group as a group that uh, has been almost triggered by something that you can't control, and it is a very time dependent thing. The identity people will be identity people for your charity for a very long time, and situational people will be a supporter of your charity as long as the events that are being provided align with what that person wants to do. So I think that, you know, one of the, I guess I'm skipping ahead now for a little bit of future stuff, but it will be interesting to look at the sort of lifetime value of these specific people to see whether, while the volume might be high for relational in terms of within a year, maybe the actual overall fundraising isn't necessarily the same, necessarily equal to the charity. So yeah, so this is how we kind of scored everybody and how we put everybody into pots. Now, when you take all of the people that you have segmented and you overlay them on top of each other, you can see these very distinct shapes. You know, this was great for us because it allowed us to sort of make sure that we were talking about very different groups of people. In the boxes below, you can see the sort of the motivational word lists, how they matched up with how many things were used. And you can see that, you know, the identity is very much I, me, my goal, my thing, my life. And the relationship is, you know, she, her, his, dad, mum, all in memory, all the things that you would expect to see if a page was based on a relationship rather than either identity or situational. And then the situational is the same, you know, challenges, running, miles, lockdown, COVID, all the things that you would expect. Interestingly, in this example, and it is pretty atypical of what we saw across all the different charities, the volume of people kind of was 60% relational and then 20-20 identity and situational. Now, interestingly, in our poll, the identity was 16%, which is very close to 20, but the relational was down to 44 and the situation was down to 40. And I do wonder whether that is a symptom of we currently don't have a motivation to have a page, or, you know, if we do, maybe we do. I'm just wondering whether I put situational down as the thing that I thought would motivate me to do it, but, you know, an external event could happen where a relational motivation happens, and maybe some of the, I feel like 20% of the situational people could end up being relational given the right sort of stimulus, if that makes sense. But yeah, just really, really interesting stuff. And, you know, we're always thinking about getting bigger volumes to make sure that all of these things are true and, you know, robust in what we're doing. So these are just some examples of how it looked when we split them out. Where to next? The age-old question, and Kaylee mentioned it at the beginning, you know, this is all great, but how do you apply it? How does this make the charity better? How does it make the supporter journey better? So there are many applications for this, not only within this sort of philanthropic psychology point of view, but even more sort of technically and generally. So, it will it's always better to understand your supporters more. Like that is always, you are always coming from a better point of view. So just being able to sort of segment your supporters in this way and see how they react differently to different things would give you great sort of better sort of clarity on the information that's in your CRM, or just another lens to look at it. And stewardship is also a really important part of that as well. I really believe that people like to be spoken to, and how based on how they speak. If you have got text from a supporter and they are literally talking to you in the way that they like to speak, then it gives you the option not suddenly, it gives you the option that you're able to speak to them in a way that they will respond to. And we will go on to a little bit more about that in a second. Um, Also, cross-selling is also a really like interesting part of this. Like understanding your supporters better, having a better stewardship with them, but also like the next best action for these supporters. Um, this would allow us to have a little bit of a better insight of that. Um, you know, if you are a situational, supporter, you don't need to know about the next warm campaign. You need to know about the next running event. So little things like that would help the efficiency of any kind of cross sell. And targeting, we've already had one question in the question section just about like targeting, and this would allow us to, this kind of segmentation would allow us to better find the people that we need to speak to for specific things. It also allows us to diversify our supporter base. Sometimes relying on relational people because they have the biggest volume is not necessarily, we've all seen the economic impact, how the economy and other things have impacted on like the charitable giving. Relying on a big swathe of people who are coming to you to do it is great, but actually, if you have a really strong identity base, you know that it's going to be harder for them to reduce support given external factors. So there's other things that you can think about. There's so many things you can think about. I hope I haven't rambled and confused it all, but there's a lot of different ways you can apply this lens to find really useful insight. A quick example of what it could be used for. So when people sign up, they are giving you their why am I doing this? Using that information, you can understand their motivation. If you're able to link that with a CRM and have more information about the supporter, you're suddenly able to do things like, if they are an identity person, they could have a different frequency of content. Like the amount of content that will cause fatigue is different for these different supporters because they are motivated from a different point of view. In the same way, the communication that you use with them, the style in which you talk to them can be different. That calling all freedom fighters is a great example, like an idea of you are celebrating them and you are talking to them the way they speak to you. And celebrating your USP is like, they support you because of who you are, so celebrate it. It's another great way to sort of strengthen this kind of journey and these comms. But like on the flip side, it's not on the flip side, on relationally, like if you're emphasizing relationships, support even more dogs like yours. These kind of things just encourage people to do the next action. If they've come in from a relational point of view, maybe it is important to think about how to tell them how important it is that they have supported your charity, but also that they could continue to do it in more ways, in memory, volunteering, just different things that you could do in your journey to keep them to extend their LTV, basically to sort of help them to stay with your charity for longer. And then situationally, celebrating future and or past and future events and achievements, like that is a great way to, you did a great job in the last marathon, the next one's coming up, we really hope that you're going to support us in the next one, or even more personal, like push your fitness to the next level. You did a run last time, what about a push-up challenge, what about a squat challenge, what about, there are lots of other things that you could do. And you can also talk about, you can also start to link, you know, the person is doing, situationally motivated people might be doing an event for their own reasons, but that's not to say that you can't highlight how it's helping you and how, what extra thing they're doing. You know, that might be the push that they need to really go, look, I was thinking about doing a run, but I wasn't sure. But when I realized how much I would be able to help and what the actual need of the charity was, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the thing that made me actually do the event. So there are lots of ways you can incorporate this into sort of journeys. We're already working with charities with this in mind to try and, you know, see how we can use this in the whole process of a supporter journey, which is like super exciting, and how we kind of see this sort of playing out or being the most useful. But that's not to say that there's not other options. And you know, sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees, sorry, but you know, we would love to have you guys tell us what you think we could use it for, and we can think about that as well, because it's been quite a challenge to keep this kind of process and study on the straight and narrow. And I'm worried personally that we have missed opportunities that are out there, and if people have had thoughts that they would like to explore, then we would love for you guys to talk to us. One of the ways you can kind of have a deeper look into this study is the white paper. It's on the website, it's in the handout section. You can email any of these addresses and we will be able to help you with it. Mine at the top, Kaylee's in the middle, and the general Wood for Trees at the bottom. And I think that is it from me. So if there are any, I'm going to have a quick look at the questions and see if we can do a little bit more. But thank you guys for listening, and I hope you found it interesting. Please download the white paper. Cool. Right, straight to the questions then. So we've had questions about using it for targeting, and I think it's super interesting to use it for targeting, because one of the I guess the bit that the study, and Kaylee, stop me rambling if I do ramble too much about this. One of the things that we haven't got to yet is how easily can we link this to like media buying, really? Because what we're currently trying to do is, well, this study was all about, can we do this? And we feel like we can do it now. And we're now beginning to think about how can we integrate this into processes. And in terms of like this idea of media buying, it's kind of, you know, there is definitely something there, and we definitely want to be using it in that at that point. But we feel like the next step is actually, you know, having the groups within the charity and then thinking how we link that to media buying, rather than being able to really jump the steps. I think we are conscious of making sure we're not building our house on sand, and making sure we do it step by step. So, you know, I think media buying is a really interesting part of this, and there's so much functionality within media buying that there was definitely ways that it could be integrated. I think it's all about, you know, just making sure that we take it step by step and do it in a logical process rather than jump ahead.
Yeah, fully agree. I think the clients who we've spoken with already about progressing this sort of project are sort of really keen to get to the end point, which is really nice to hear, because it seems like there is a lot of, pardon the pun, but a lot of motivation from internal charity teams to work on this sort of thing to improve supporter experience, which for me is where I see a lot of this application, is around crafting that really excellent supporter experience, so people want to come back and do another event or give to your charity in some other way because they've had a good time doing it.
Another question we've just had is about what kind of questions after sign up can we ask to understand motivations? Should it be subtle? I think that's a fascinating question for two reasons. One is, should it be subtle? On one hand, I think just asking the very simple question, why do you support our charity, or what are your motivations to support our charity? Super open-ended. You end up getting a lot of information out of people because they don't really have a lot of guidance, and they are just like, it's almost a brain dump for them, and they're just talking about what they think. Where it becomes interesting is if the event motivational segmentation, for want of a better word, is implemented, can you ask 3 questions, have them open-ended, but almost have them aligned with the motivations, and make the process a bit slicker? You know, if it's already implemented, you will already have a motivational word list for each segment, and you could be asking questions to see whether people respond more to one set of words or another. So I think it probably does have to be subtle. I think the most important thing is that it is the data that you're using is input from the supporter themselves. They are talking from their own, they have not been guided to say something. There's no right answer. It's just what they think. So I think that that's quite an interesting thing to think about. But yes, it's subtle, not subtle. I don't know. Like it's a tough one.
I would echo that as well. And I think it's another place where things like golden questions can be really useful. It's sort of generally well known in the world of psychology around having socially desirable responses. So people answer questions in a way that they think you want to hear, which is kind of human nature, I suppose. But it's something that we want to try and avoid because we want the truth and not just what people think we want to hear. And that's where I think we can get really clever with devising equally desirable questions. So things like, I want to do this event because I just really want the t-shirt. Things like that sound as good as, I want to do this event because I really love you and your charity. Well, obviously in those examples, kind of it's a no-brainer which one someone's going to pick, particularly if things like your marathon places are really, really limited and you've only got so many to give out and you've got way more participants to choose from. Having those questions equally desirable and really just sort of celebrating, well, that fundraiser has chosen your charity, so you'll love them no matter what, is really, really important.
And we've had another question, which is one of the first questions I think we got asked when we were proposing to even do this feasibility study is, and do the different types vary in value? And we have seen a difference in value, but again, the work that we're doing now, sort of the step beyond this, is almost we're trying to audit what it all means, because I think that, you know, taking specific events or taking events within a year will give you a snapshot of what the people have donated through this lens. But actually, as I hopefully you remember I said before, you know, the identity people will not just fundraise for money. Like their value to you as a charity is not just the money, because they are advocates of your charity. They could be campaigning as well. They could be doing so many other things that add value to you. And like in a hopefully not in a flippant way, but situational people will be wearing your shirt, running around London, hopefully being on TV and doing brand awareness things. So what we're doing right now is, while there is a monetary difference in terms of, you know, average gift and total gift by segment, we're trying to be careful about not saying one is better than the other, because actually it's a much bigger thing. I think that if we're happy that, you know, the motivation of the people is what it is, then we're kind of focusing on that. We are looking and tracking these things, and we obviously will use it in the future to think about how to have the charity better supported. But it's just one of those things that we're really trying to, we don't want this to be just a scoring of like how much money will you get out of these people, because we think it's so much more powerful than that. Another great question is, will the motivations change throughout the supporter's journey, and how would we track this? So that is a fantastic question. It will absolutely, like even within just one sort of one input from one story, they will have different motivations, and their motivations will be stronger or less strong given different things that are happening in their lives. Or, you know, coming up to summer, do more people want to do runs than would do runs in the winter, knowing when the training would have to take place and stuff, you know, stuff like that. The external factors will affect how much you, where the split of your motivation, I almost think of it as. So I think that people will change, and like events within time, within your lifetime, will change your event. I'm not sure I feel like it's age related. What do you think, Kaylee?
I I think I'd be really skeptical to make any hard and fast claims on a recorded webinar when we don't have
Good
the
point.
information to back that up. But I think it's a really fab question, and what could be really interesting is to look at those who come in as situational people because they just want to run that marathon, whatever it might be. Where do they go after that? Is it that they have such a fantastic experience being your supporter that you can almost convert them to following your morals and your ideals and your charity ethos? And so almost transition them into becoming someone whose identity is, part of your charity as well. Can you morph them into being someone motivated based on their personal identity? And therefore, they will go on to support your charity in other ways.
The flip side, or the other option of that is like when you have a relational supporter who comes in for a specific reason, maybe the next comms is about, like, thank you for what you did for the relationship that you had with that person. You could, like, would you like to do the marathon a year after, like on the anniversary of the in memory, here is like an event that we are running. We are like, we're trying to bring everybody together who has been affected by this in a, like a park walk or whatever it might be. And you might actually be able to give relational people who maybe wouldn't necessarily have an obvious next best action, something in a situational thing where you're actually motivating them. You're trying to offer them an event that might help with their motivation for the charitable cause, rather than necessarily just leaving them alone or trying to get them to do another relational thing. Because relational event, or relationally motivated people, the event is not necessarily something that is regular and would want to be repeated almost. So um, and there's another question. So hopefully that was, sorry, I'm trying to do questions and talk at the same time. It's harder than I thought it would be. Do many charities divide up their fundraising income into these three groups categories? No, they don't. This is the first time that we have seen or are aware of anyone trying to, take event donations and kind of split them into different categories to sort of better understand, the people behind the donations. So it's not something that has really been done before. This is why we've kind of been hopefully quite clear about it being a feasibility study. This is us checking whether we can do this, whether it produces results that are different, and whether it can be implementable in organizations to help them with what they're doing. I would just say as well, one of the hugely interesting things about this is it feels a little bit like this is becoming more executable because of technology. I've heard of many charities who have lots of phone conversations, transcribing those phone conversations into text and storing them for whatever reason. If you have a lot of stored free text, then this idea of text analysis, text mining, it becomes way more interesting and way more doable. Like we have looked at this through the lens of like philanthropic psychology and event motivation. That's not to say that you couldn't change the technique to look at something different. I think there's two really interesting parts to this project, and two sides to the bridge, almost like Kaylee, like we showed in the slide. The philanthropic psychology is a huge part of understanding why people do what they do, and that's a massive and interesting thing in and of itself. The function of the text mining is hugely interesting. We have connected the two to be able to produce these results. That's not to say that there couldn't be more work on philanthropic psychology in isolation of text analysis, and there couldn't be more work in terms of text analysis that is not related to philanthropic psychology, but some other categorization. So this is why we're super interested to hear people's ideas, what they have in terms of text, free text, what they could get, what they'd like to do with it, whether there's anything that we could do to help them sort of achieve the goals that you guys have. So I think I've rambled on enough. Do you think I've rambled on enough, Kaylee?
I've just seen the time. Yeah, 1 minute past 12.
Perfect.
I think.
Late
Yeah, I have
even.
seen there are quite even. Yeah, I've seen there are quite a few questions in the chat, which perhaps we'll do a follow up on afterwards. Because these are all really interesting questions, and I think we can both probably sit and talk for easily another hour. Because we're both really excited about this, and it's been really nice to hear everyone's questions and have everyone either join us now or watch the recording later to hear that everyone else is as motivated about it as we are.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we will call it there. We will endeavor to answer all the questions that we can, either and reply to people if as much as possible outside of this meeting. And yes, please just get in contact with us if you have anything more you want us to ask or say, and we will do our best to either reply email wise or put a meeting in with us. So thank you all. Go and have lovely lunches, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys. Bye.